Hello again. I'm back with another clock, and this one is a New Haven. It's only the second one that I've come across. A bit of history about the company is that it was started in 1853. They were in business for over 100 years, and they mostly made what I could see are pendulum wind-up type clocks. Now, I don't know when they started making electric ones, but the company ended up filing for bankruptcy in 1956, and they stopped clock production in 1960. What caught my eye on this one was the shape of the dial. It's not round or square or a rectangle, but this is like a cathedral shape. I found it on eBay for $10. It was being sold as a non-working clock, and once I got it, I realized that it's not in a clock case, but it's set up in a hinged pedestal frame. Let me turn it around. And it is missing the set knob, but you can see how it's it's hinged. But what I noticed on the front of the dial, it reads 8-day. That's something that you'll see on wind-up clocks, that it'll run for 8 days. And I couldn't understand why an electric clock would say 8-day. So what I did was I reached out to the NAWCC, that's the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors, and I'm able to post some photos and questions there, and pretty much asked, does anybody know why an electric clock would say 8-day? I heard back from someone, and he showed me photos of this clock as a wind-up. And I'll show you the photo. You can see it's the same clock, and I'll show you the photo of the back of it. You can see the wind-up key, and what he tells me is that he believes this clock was converted to electric by someone. And I figure it had to be someone who works at building these clocks for a living. I don't think it's the kind of thing that just anyone could do. I also noticed that neither clock has a second hand, and I'd like to think that an electric clock should be able to take one. I do see a little stem on the front that looks like it could hold a second hand, and if I can come up with one, that would be a nice look. I have not tried plugging this one in yet. The power cord is a bit frayed, and I don't want to take a chance on burning something out, so I'm going to set it up on my work table and look to take it apart. The first thing I want to do is check that the circuit is intact, no damage to the wiring. To do that, I use my ohm meter. Just have to touch the leads to the end of the plug here, and if it's intact, you'll see numbers flashing. Okay, so we have an intact circuit, which means this clock should be repairable. What I'm going to do next is work on taking it apart. And the first step for me, I think I'm going to look to remove this from the pedestal. That's a tight one. There we go. Okay. Looks like a little washer or a spacer. I'll try to come up with another one. It's missing from here. Now I have to take a look to figure out how I'm going to remove the motor from this frame. So give me a couple of minutes to take a look at that. What I'm seeing is it looks as if there was supposed to be a wooden frame covering the back of the clock, and the top piece of wood is missing here. You can see, I guess, a couple of screw holes that would have held a little piece of wood here. This side piece I can move away, and it exposes a couple of nuts holding the clock in on this side. I assume the same will be found here. This piece of wood is nailed in, but there's a screw on the bottom. I'll have to take these two pieces off. And what I said earlier, that this clock really wasn't in a case, it was just in this pedestal frame, I guess technically this would be considered the clock case. And another reason to consider this as having been made by someone other than the actual clock company is there's no writing on the back, no name of the company, something like a model number. Usually that information is always on the back of these clocks. Anyway, what I want to do next is remove these two side pieces and then figure out a way to get the whole thing out from this little frame. So let me work on that. I've removed what's really just a brad nail from here and took out this screw so I can get this piece off. There's the two nuts there. Let me get this screw out. Okay, now if I undo these nuts, this whole thing should come out, but the hands are going to come with it. So I need to remove the whole thing from this frame. And what I'm seeing, which is kind of unusual, a couple of screws here and then down here, which is securing this to the frame. So I have to somehow figure a way to undo these screws with a tiny screwdriver. I don't know if that's going to work. Let me probably just try to lift this case off of here first. So let me undo these four nuts. This one is getting stranger by the minute. And what I'm seeing is I've been able to remove 3 of the nuts. This fourth one, I don't know how these screws are attached to the other side of this case, but as I rotate this nut, the screw turns with it, so I can't remove it. What I'm also noticing is each one of these screws has been snipped, like with a bolt cutter or clippers to shorten it. It's looking more and more like a homemade job. So what I'm going to have to do to remove this, I'm going to have to try to remove these little screws on the top and on the bottom so I can get the whole case out, and then probably hold this screw on the other end while I remove this nut. So let me work on getting those out of here. These 2 screws came out pretty easily, but for these 2, I had to use a vice grip to gradually just rotate them out. But now this whole thing should lift out, so let's give it a shot. There you go. It's a pretty interesting piece of glass. So, okay, the next step is going to be I need to remove the dial so that I can grab hold of the screw on this side where this nut is. So next up, let me take a look to see how I'm going to remove the hands. So give me a minute or two to take a look at that. It feels as if the stem here is threaded. So I'm thinking this should be able to unscrew, but it's not a nut in the traditional sense. It's round. And so far, when I'm grabbing it with pliers, I'm not really able to turn it at all. So I'll probably hit it with a bit of WD-40, let it soak for a while, and then give it another try. I spray a little in a cap and then just apply a little bit around the stem, and I'm going to let this soak in for a good long time. Meanwhile, let me gather up these parts here. Okay, let this soak at least 15-20 minutes, maybe longer, and then I'll give it another try to see if I can undo that. Okay, I'm ready to give it another try. Starting to turn. Okay, next I'm going to work on the hour hand. Well, this is unfortunate. As soon as I tried to pry off the hour hand a little bit, it just broke off. So now, if I can get this clock working, I have to come up with a new pair of hands. And that could be quite a challenge. But there's still a part that I have to remove from here. Although I think the dial should lift out of here. Oh, interesting. There's little pins, screws. Okay, securing the dial to this back plate, or front plate, I should say. So let me work on unscrewing those next. The 3 screws are out. Let's see now when I lift up the dial. And here are the 4 screws on this plate. And this is the one I have to undo. That is tight there, huh? Okay. Okay, this whole thing I should be able to remove now. Let's get these screws out of here. Okay, I think it's the wire preventing this from coming apart. There we go. So it just reads here, Synchron. I've never heard of that before. I've never seen this before. But what I want to do next, because I'm not happy with how frayed this power cord is, I'm going to undo the tape, attach a new cord, and plug it in to see if it's working. So let me work on that. I've attached a new power cord. I'm just going to secure it with a couple of wire nuts. Okay, let me plug it in. And turn it on. Oh, something's moving there. You can't really see the gears turning too quickly, but you can little flywheel or something inside the motor is rotating. So what I have to do next, I have to remove what's left of this hour hand and try to find one that will fit, or at least reattach the minute hand and let it sit for a bit and see if it's actually running. So let me do that. Once I know where it's working properly or not, then I'll continue. I also want to mention I noticed writing on this side of the plate, it just says C-1 rear set, but down here it's 5-1950. So this motor is from May of 1950. How much after this it was placed into this clock, I don't know, but I'm assuming this clock was manufactured sometime in the 1950s. Anyway, back to getting the at least the minute hand on here to see if it's going to work. I reseated the minute hand. We turn it on, and I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. As you can see, it's working. It's been a few minutes and it's moved. I think based on the fact that I really don't see the gears spinning in here, tells me that there is no second hand for this clock. There is no gear going fast enough to turn once per minute. Next, I'm going to try to remove what's left of the hour hand and see if I can come up with a new one. So let me work on that, and then when I have something, I'll continue. I think I've come up with a hand that's going to work, and it's pretty much almost the exact style as the broken one. I just have to adjust it to fit around the stem here. But once I've done that, I don't then want to have to remove it to put it back on. So I'm going to work on reassembling the dial back onto here. Then I'll work on getting the hand to fit. I've realized that I have to do more than just seat the dial here and then put the hands on. I have to completely reassemble the whole thing. So I'm just going to reverse all the steps I did in taking it apart. Once it's back together, then I'll work on securing the hands. Okay, I've reassembled the clock. The mechanism is back into the case. I put the nuts with the screws back into position. I replaced those snipped cut screws with proper ones, so this is a nice tight fit now. Put the dial on with those 3 small screws at the corner. I can also mention that although with a lot of these clocks that I've worked on that run, I still take them apart to give them a good cleaning. This one is so clean and it's the quietest motor I've ever come across. I felt there's no need to take it apart. What I want to do next is seat the minute hand. And now I'm going to turn it so that it's pointing to the 12. I can take that off. Now I have to work on securing the hour hand, also pointing at the 12, and that'll take some time for me to get that exactly how I want it. So let me work on that. Once it's in place, then I'll continue. I'm happy to say that I was successful in attaching the hour hand. I then reseated the minute hand and I placed the nut back on it and tested that the hands are turning properly. So what's next is, before I place this back into the frame, what I'd like to do, I see a lot of dirt and dust on the wood, so I want to clean all of this up. Then I'll look to get it back together. So let me work on that. I've cleaned up the wood. I also decided to go over it with my Howard's Restore finish. I think it gave it a nice shine. What I have to do next is I'm going to place the glass, which cleaned up nicely as well, into the frame. And then I'm going to position the clock over that. And now I have to secure it with the 2 screws here and down here. That'll take a few minutes, so let me work on that. Once that's completed, then I'll continue. The clock is back in the frame. What I have to do next, reattach these rear pieces of wood. I have to place a couple of screws to hold them in. Let me do that, and then I'll continue. The side pieces are back in place. I secured them with 4 screws this time instead of the little nail. There was nothing here, so these aren't going to move anymore. What I would like to do is that I'm not really happy with the look of these screw heads being exposed. If I can come up with a small piece of wood to fit in here, sort of cover that, complete the frame, I think it'll be a better look. So let me see what I can come up with for that. What I came up with was I glued together a couple of pieces of wood and then stained it to try to match the back frame. I found the wood of all places, a paint stirrer stick. So that worked out rather well. I just fit it in here, and I think that's going to be a pretty good look. I just need to secure it now with a couple of screws. I've secured the piece of wood. Now the next step, before I place this back in the pedestal, I have to attach the power cord, and that will take several minutes. I'm not going to really show the whole thing, but I'll explain what I plan to do. When I got this, the wires were connected just with electrical tape. I don't want to do that because that's not going to last. What I plan to do is I'm going to use heat shrink tubing, and the way I'll do it is I'm going to put one piece on one wire, and a larger piece will go through both wires. Once I've attached this here and slide this down and shrink it, then I'm going to attach this wire and then slide this one up, which will cover this smaller one. And then I'll shrink that down. So you're just going to see this one piece coming out the back of the clock. Anyway, let me get to work on that, and if I can, I'll show you a few of the steps as I go through each procedure on it. The first thing I did, I'll try to show it, I soldered together these 2 wires, and now I'm going to slip the tube over the wire, and then I'm going to use a hot air gun to shrink that down. This is what it looks like. It's a mini hot air gun. They make a lot of noise. And it takes a minute or so to do that, so I'll continue on my own. Okay, the first tube is shrunk down. Next, I'm going to solder together these 2 wires. I've soldered the other 2 wires together. Now I have to slide up the other heat shrink tube over this. And it's a very tight fit, and I have to go very slowly because I don't want to disturb where I soldered. So I'm going to work on that a little on my own, but I think maybe I got it quickly enough. Yeah, there we go. Okay. The other thing is that I don't need this to be as long as it is, so I can cut some of it off. It'll make the power cord a little more easy to manage. So let me work on that, then I'll continue. I just hit a little bit around here and a slit up the side, and I can peel this right off. Now I'm going to hit this with my hot air gun. There's also an attachment you can use on the hot air gun. It makes the hot air kind of curl around, and you're heating both sides of it at the same time. It speeds up the process. Anyway, I'll work on that on my own, and then I'll continue. I've completed the work on the shrink wrap tubing. What I want to do now is place the clock back into the pedestal. Try this one first. Got a little washer for this side. Very good. Next, I'm going to set this back up on my workbench, plug it in, and make sure that it's still working. one other thing I want to mention is that so far I have been unable to come up with a proper set knob. The only thing I found, I have a small nut that actually fits this thread, and I'm able to use it to adjust the time. I will continue to look for one that's meant to go with a clock like this, but at least I'm able to adjust the time as needed. Anyway, let me get this on my workbench. I have it set up and plugged in. Let me turn it on. It's a New Haven 8-day wind-up clock that was converted to electric, I think sometime in 1950. And I think the odds are that when it was manufactured as a wind-up, it was probably sometime in the 1940s. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would like to say thank you to all of my subscribers who have been coming up with all manners of questions and comments. It's all greatly appreciated. And that pretty much wraps things up. And I think I've spoken for about a minute or so, and you can see that the minute hand is moving. So yes, the clock is working. Bye for now.